Right now, two of the most powerful countries on Earth are locked in one of the most dangerous rivalries on the planet. Every few months, the world holds its breath, wondering if it will finally tip into all-out war. Threats, crushing sanctions, targeted killings, and even direct airstrikes. The list of hostilities between them stretches back for decades. To listen to them today, you would think America and Iran had hated each other since the beginning of time. Their leaders speak of one another like sworn, eternal enemies. But here is the twist that almost nobody remembers. It completely changes how you see this entire conflict. Not so long ago, these two countries were not enemies at all. They were actually close friends. America once called Iran one of its most important and trusted allies in the entire Middle East. The two worked hand in hand. So how on earth did one of America's best friends transform into one of its greatest enemies? How does that much trust curdle into that much hatred? The answer is a gripping story of oil, a secret betrayal, a furious revolution, and the terrifying race for a bomb. And to truly understand the hatred of today, you first have to understand the friendship that came before it. So let's start at the beginning. Let's rewind, all the way back to the middle of the last century, to a very different Iran. Back then, Iran was not a republic at all. It was ruled by a king, a monarch known as the Shah. And the Shah was one of the closest partners America had anywhere in the region. The two governments were tightly bound together. The reason for that friendship was simple, and it bubbled up straight out of the ground. Oil. Iran was sitting on some of the largest oil reserves on the entire planet, a treasure the industrial world desperately needed. But for years, it was Western companies that controlled that oil, and they kept the overwhelming share of the profit for themselves. And underneath the warm friendship, a deep and bitter problem was quietly growing. Many ordinary Iranians felt that their nation's greatest treasure was being stolen right out from under them. They wanted control of their own oil, their own wealth, and their own destiny as a people. So Iran turned to a bold and popular new leader, an elected prime minister who promised to change everything. And he did something that shook the West. He moved to take the oil industry back into Iranian hands. The Western powers were absolutely furious at the thought of losing all of that precious oil. And so, in 1953, intelligence agents from America and Britain secretly plotted to remove him from power. They funded protests, spread propaganda through the newspapers, and quietly engineered his downfall from the shadows. The elected leader was overthrown, and complete, unchecked power was handed straight back to the Shah. For America, it was a clever, quiet victory that protected its oil and its influence in the region. But for millions of Iranians, it was a deep and unforgivable betrayal that they would never forget. Their young democracy had been snatched away from them by a foreign power, purely for oil. That single event, over 70 years ago, planted a seed of resentment that is still growing to this very day. For the next 25 years, the Shah ruled Iran as a king, with America standing firmly behind him. He poured the country's vast oil money into modernizing Iran at a truly breakneck speed. Western fashion, Western cinema, and Western business came flooding into the streets of the big cities. On the glittering surface, Iran looked like a dazzling success story that the whole world admired. But beneath that shiny surface, the old anger kept quietly building, year after year. Because the Shah ruthlessly crushed anyone who dared to speak out against him. His feared secret police silenced critics, spied on ordinary people, and filled the prisons with his opponents. And while the wealthy cities modernized, huge numbers of Iranians felt poor, left behind, and completely unheard. Many also felt that the Shah had thrown away their traditions and their religion in his rush to copy the West. So all of that gathering resentment began to gather around one powerful religious leader living in exile abroad. From across the border, his recorded speeches were smuggled in, calling on the Iranian people to rise up. And by the year 1979, all of that built-up pressure finally exploded into the open. Millions upon millions of Iranians, from every walk of life, came flooding into the streets. It swelled into one of the single largest revolutions in all of modern human history. And the mighty Shah, for all of his wealth and all of his soldiers, simply could not stop it. In the end, he fled the country in disgrace, leaving his crown and his throne behind him. The exiled religious leader returned home in triumph, welcomed by an enormous, roaring crowd. And overnight, Iran was reborn as something entirely new, an Islamic republic. The brand new government had one very clear and very loud view of the United States of America. It branded America the Great Satan, the ultimate villain of the modern world. In their eyes, America was the foreign power that had stolen their democracy and propped up a hated tyrant for decades. The old friendship was not merely over. It had flipped completely into pure, burning hostility. And then came the single event that would scar the relationship between the two nations forever. A crowd of young revolutionaries stormed over the walls of the American embassy in the capital, Tehran. They seized more than 50 American diplomats and staff members and held them captive. And they did not hold them for days or for weeks. They held them for 444 days. Night after night, Americans watched the unfolding crisis on their televisions, feeling humiliated and enraged. America even launched a daring secret mission to rescue them, and it ended in humiliating disaster in the desert. That long hostage crisis burned itself deep into the American memory, and it never really faded. From that moment onward, the two nations became sworn, bitter enemies, cut off from one another. America slammed a wave of heavy economic sanctions down onto the Iranian economy. It worked to cut Iran off from the world's banks, its markets, and its trade routes. But even as enemies, the two sides rarely fought each other directly, face to face. Instead, they fought a long, simmering shadow war, playing out all across the wider region. When a brutal, devastating war erupted between Iran and its neighbor Iraq, the hostility deepened further. America quietly threw much of its support behind Iran's enemy in that terrible conflict. The bitterness and the sense of betrayal only grew sharper with every passing year. Feeling isolated and encircled, Iran built up its own network of allies and armed groups across the region. Through that network, Iran could strike at America and its friends without ever fighting a direct, open war. And in response, America armed and backed Iran's rivals right back, funding the other side. For decades, it stayed frozen like this. A tense, dangerous, indirect conflict that never quite boiled over. But over the years, one single issue slowly rose up above all of the rest. The one issue with the terrifying power to turn their long shadow war into a real, catastrophic one. Iran's nuclear program. Iran always insisted, again and again, that its nuclear work was purely for peaceful energy. It said it simply wanted electricity for its cities and medicine for its people, not weapons. But America, Israel, and their allies feared something far darker was hidden beneath the surface. They were convinced that Iran was secretly working, step by step, toward building a nuclear bomb. Because a nuclear-armed Iran, they warned, could completely upend the balance of power in the region. And Iran's nervous rivals might then feel forced to rush and build their own bombs in response. So, for a while, the world decided to try a completely different path. Diplomacy. After years of tense, exhausting talks, in 2015, a truly landmark deal was finally signed. Under the deal, Iran agreed to strictly limit and shrink its nuclear program. And in return, many of the crushing sanctions choking its economy would finally be lifted. For one brief, fragile, hopeful moment, it looked like the decades of hostility might finally ease. But that hope did not survive for very long at all. A new American president tore the nuclear deal apart and walked away from it completely. In its place, he launched an aggressive new campaign that he called Maximum Pressure. Sanctions harsher than any before came crashing down, squeezing the Iranian economy until it gasped. And it was ordinary Iranians who suffered the most, as prices soared and countless jobs simply vanished. Feeling cornered and betrayed once again, Iran restarted and rapidly expanded its nuclear work. And so the two countries began spiraling closer to open war than they had been in decades. Then, one day, America crossed a dramatic and shocking new line. It killed one of Iran's most powerful and revered military commanders in a sudden strike. Iran, gripped by fury, fired a barrage of missiles straight back at American military bases in revenge. For a few genuinely terrifying hours, the entire world braced itself for a full-blown war. Somehow, at the very last moment, both sides managed to step back from the edge of the cliff. But the underlying danger never truly went away. It just went quiet for a while. And in recent times, the long-simmering conflict has erupted violently into the open all over again. Iran and Israel, longtime bitter enemies, traded direct blows for the whole world to see. And America struck Iran's most important nuclear sites directly from the air. The long, patient shadow war had finally stepped fully out into the harsh light of day. So why should any of this distant conflict actually matter to you, wherever in the world you happen to live? The first reason lies hidden deep beneath the desert sand. It is oil. Iran sits right beside a narrow channel of water called the Strait of Hormuz, and an absolutely enormous share of the entire world's oil is shipped through that one tiny gap every single day. If Iran ever chose to block that channel, fuel prices could suddenly explode all across the entire planet. So a faraway conflict over Iran can reach right into your life and hit the price you pay at the fuel pump. The second reason is the bomb itself and everything it could unleash. If Iran ever did build a nuclear weapon, its frightened rivals might scramble to build their own. And a single new bomb in the region could set off a dangerous chain reaction that is very hard to stop. And the third reason is the ever-present risk of a much wider, far more terrible war. Iran, America, Israel, and a deeply tangled web of allies are all bound tightly together. One single wrong move by any of them could drag dozens of nations into one massive, devastating conflict. That is exactly why the whole world watches this one rivalry so closely and so nervously. Two nations, once the very closest of friends, now locked together in decades of fear and fury. A bitter rivalry born from a single betrayal, more than 70 years ago, over oil and power. And it still shapes the headlines you read on your phone screen today. Whether it finally ends in a lasting peace deal, or one day an outright disaster, may well decide the future of the entire Middle East and send ripples across the whole world. For now, though, the standoff simply grinds on, tense, bitter, and completely unresolved. Two proud nations, each utterly convinced that it is in the right, and neither one willing to bend. And so the whole world keeps holding its breath, waiting anxiously to see which one moves next. If you want to understand another rivalry that could reshape our entire world just as dramatically, then watch the video appearing on your screen right now. And if you love pulling apart how the world really works, one country and one story at a time, then do one simple thing. Subscribe. A brand new country, fully explained, every single day.